Hello, everyone. Tonight we're going to talk about how a flower arrangement, a fake smile, and a predator in a tuxedo led to one of the biggest takedowns of elder fraud in American history. Picture this: a wedding reception glowing with white roses, champagne fountains, and awkward family dynamics. You've probably been to one, but you probably haven't sat behind a flower arrangement so tall it could hide a Cessna. I did, and I knew right then they weren't just hiding me from the camera, they were hoping I'd disappear. You probably won't survive in this world if you think polite silence is a form of protection. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love knowing who's out there, especially when we dive into stories like this one. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. They placed me at table 12, which I quickly learned was the exiled auntie table. Except I wasn't an auntie. I was the mother of the bride. My daughter Emma had married into the Thornfield family. Yes, that Thornfield family. And the seating chart reflected their priorities with painful clarity. Marcus Thornfield, the groom, had seated his college friends front and center. His parents were seated like royalty. And me? I got the hibiscus jungle. Now, you might think a 72-year-old widow wouldn't notice these things. But let me tell you something no one ever tells you about old age. It doesn't dull your instincts, it sharpens them. You've been disappointed so many times that you start noticing the pattern in how people sideline you, and darling, patterns don't lie. My modest gray dress, grandmother's pearls, and soft smile were all part of a well-crafted image. Harmless, tasteful, unremarkable. I played it to perfection. I'd spent 2 years pretending to be wallpaper while quietly building an archive of people's true colors. Across the room, I could see Marcus holding court like some finance prince, dazzling the donors, flashing that curated smile. Oh yes, I'd seen that smile before. Men like him have multiple versions. There's the toothy grin for people with money, the sincere nod for those with power, and the glazed-over patience for people they don't need yet. When he made his way toward me during cocktail hour, wine in hand, I knew something was coming. "Mrs. Hartley," he beamed, "you look radiant." "Why, thank you, Marcus. It's amazing what a little floral camouflage can do for one's complexion." He didn't flinch. That's when I knew I was dealing with a professional, the type of man who reads people's reactions like bar graphs. He made himself comfortable beside me, lowering his voice like we were co-conspirators. I was hoping we could spend some quality time together soon, just the two of us, really talk. "Most men buy dinner before pitching a merger," I said, swirling my wine. He laughed too quickly and checked the room like a magician, ensuring no one else saw the trick. "You have a wonderful sense of humor." "Oh dear, I'm not joking." That flicker behind his eyes, that pause that lasted half a breath too long, that was the tell. He didn't see me as a person. I was a moving part in the machinery of his ambition. "Dinner this week?" he asked, smoothing his tie. "Private place. I think you'll find it enlightening." "Thursday," I replied. "I do love a good mystery meal." As he walked away, I caught my reflection in the tall mirror beside the cake table. There I was, gray-haired, sweet-faced, tucked away like an afterthought. But here's another truth they don't tell you about aging. The people who look like they've been sidelined, they're usually the ones holding the map. I spent the rest of the evening watching, listening, learning. Patricia, Marcus's mother, waltzed past me 3 times without making eye contact. A woman dripping in diamonds shouldn't feel so invisible to someone she'd just become related to, but Patricia clearly believed in strategic blindness. Emma looked stunning in great-grandmother's lace. My girl had grown up so fast it hurt, and now she was married into a family that smiled with their teeth, not their hearts. At one point during the reception, as Emma danced with Marcus, I saw Patricia lean over to a family friend and whisper something while glancing toward me. I smiled and raised my glass in their direction. Her expression barely twitched. Back at table 12, the Hendersons from Robert's old firm, Marcus had conveniently seated them beside me, asked polite questions about my late husband's investments. I gave polite, vague answers. After all, I had every reason to be careful. Because the truth, you see, was something no one at that wedding knew. Not Emma, not Marcus, not Patricia. Robert had left me far more than grief and good china. He'd left me secrets, assets, and most importantly, instructions. There was a reason I played the harmless widow. There was a reason I dressed in muted tones and clipped coupons in public. Because predators hunt the vulnerable, and I wanted to look like the easiest target in the room. That's the thing about age. You learn that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it wears pearls and smiles through insults. Sometimes it sits quietly behind hibiscus, waiting for the game to begin. Marcus thought our dinner was going to be a formality, a soft conversation with an old woman ripe for grooming. But dinner for me was the start of the hunt, and I was hungry. Thursday came dressed in its best illusions. Blue skies, light wind, and just enough chill in the air to make you believe the world was gentle. I wore a simple black dress, modest but not meek, paired with Robert's old watch that didn't tick anymore, but looked dignified from a distance. You'd be surprised how often things that no longer function still hold value. People, watches, marriages. The key is knowing which ones to keep and which ones to bury. Marcus had chosen a restaurant downtown, the kind that pronounced menu like it required a passport. I arrived 10 minutes early because women like me don't arrive late. We arrive ready. And when I say ready, I mean I had a voice recorder in my handbag, a second pair of reading glasses, the real ones were in my coat pocket with the listening device, and a pen that, if twisted the right way, activated a panic call to Carol. Never underestimate the preparedness of an elderly woman. We've survived husbands, children, wars, and tax season. Marcus stood as I entered, all polished confidence and designer cufflinks. "Sylvia," he said warmly, kissing the air beside my cheek. "You look absolutely radiant." "Must be the lighting," I replied, flattering if a bit theatrical. He chuckled, not missing a beat. "Shall we sit?" The waiter appeared, young, nervous, probably crushed under student debt. Marcus ordered wine like he owned the vineyard, choosing something that had a vintage older than our server's acne scars. I pretended not to know that it would cost more than my monthly grocery bill. We made small talk at first. Emma's happiness, the wedding photos, the weather. Then, like every wolf in a dinner jacket, he lowered his voice and leaned in. "How are you managing things, Sylvia? Really?" There it was, the velvet hook in the conversation. A gentle tug to see if the fish would bite. "Oh, I'm fine," I replied. "My garden's thriving, the books need dusting, and the thermostat has developed a thrilling tendency to reset itself. Keeps things adventurous." He smiled, but his eyes tightened. "I mean financially," he said. "It must be a lot. The house, the decisions, the responsibilities." Robert always said I had opinions for 3 people. I sipped my wine. "It's been excellent company." He tried not to show impatience, but it flared briefly behind his eyes, like a candle that burned too fast. Then came the soft sigh of concern and a neatly rehearsed transition into business. "I brought something with me tonight," he said, slipping a folder from his leather briefcase with the care of a priest unveiling scripture. "Just some ideas to give you peace of mind." He laid the folder on the table between us. Vanilla cardstock, gold trim, and the subtle scent of cologne that said, "Trust me, I'm expensive." I opened it. Power of attorney, medical decision rights, full financial access. Marcus had decided the best way to help me was to own me. I didn't flinch, I even smiled. "This is quite thorough," I said, flipping through the pages like they were a fashion catalogue. "Do you often give legal advice over soup?" "My attorney specializes in elder transitions," he said. "I've seen firsthand how vulnerable people become when left unprotected. Odd fact, male spiders of some species gift wrap insects to offer female spiders before mating. Sometimes they even wrap up useless debris to trick them. Charming, isn't it?" I looked Marcus dead in the eye. "And Emma is aware of this charming initiative?" "Of course," he lied without blinking. "She just wants you to feel safe." That word again, safe, it sounds so lovely until you realize it's being used to build a cage. And if I signed all this, what changes exactly? Nothing really, just safeguards in case something ever happens to you. Mental decline, a stroke, it's just wise. Wisdom, the very currency of old age. Yet here I was being treated like a toddler on a ledge. Academic argument time. Power of attorney laws exist to empower vulnerable individuals, not to strip their agency preemptively. What Marcus proposed wasn't legal foresight, it was strategic exploitation. And you'd be handling these decisions with Emma. Together, yes. "How comforting," I said, folding the papers slowly. "So if I had a bad day or forgot my keys, you'd—" "What? Move me to a facility and sell the china?" He stiffened. "That's not what this is about." "Isn't it?" A flicker of something cold passed between us. And in that moment, I saw the boy behind the plan. The one who gambled too much, owed too many people, and saw his wife's mother as a solution, not a soul. "Well," I said, returning the folder, "I'll definitely review this, with my own counsel." He blinked. "You have a lawyer?" "Oh, yes," I said sweetly. "She's terribly fond of the law, just can't stop talking about it." Marcus smiled tightly, the kind of smile that says, "Well, this just got inconvenient." "Of course," he said, "take your time." But his voice betrayed him. It was already racing to come up with a plan B. We finished dinner with forced politeness. He paid, naturally, and walked me to the door with all the chivalry of a man realizing he might have overplayed his hand. At the valet, I leaned in just a touch too close. "Marcus," I said, "you strike me as someone who always plans ahead. You did bring a notary with you tonight, didn't you?" He paled. "How did you—" "Lucky guess." I slid into the car and let the door close softly. The night air was brisk with consequence. Back home, I pulled out the recorder and set it next to Robert's old photo on the mantle. "That's one for the file, darling," I whispered. "Let's see how our boy handles the next move." I spent most of Friday morning doing what any good widow does when someone tries to rob her, watering the begonias and calling her lawyer. Carol Peterson picked up on the third ring, her voice as crisp as dry toast and twice as satisfying. "Good morning, Sylvia. What did the wolf bring for dinner?" Papers. Glossy ones. Power of attorney. Full financial oversight. Medical decision-making authority. All nicely dressed in concern and cologne. She exhaled through her nose. Let me guess, he framed it as a kindness? A blessing, really, like the flu in spring. Carol had been Robert's choice, long before his diagnosis. She was smart, tenacious, and allergic to predatory behavior. In other words, she was perfect. "I need a deep dive on Marcus Thornfield," I told her. Assets, debts, previous financial behavior. Let's find out who he owes and what made him pick my bank account as the answer. I'm already on it, she said. Robert anticipated this. That sentence made me pause. Robert anticipated this. Carol continued. He set up a trust, remember? Irrevocable, tightly sealed, with access parameters so strict they could survive an earthquake. Yes, I said slowly, but Robert never told me the scope. That's because he didn't want you worried, but it's time. There's a quiet kind of panic that comes not from fear, but from realizing just how much someone loved you. Robert had left more than instructions. He'd left a fortress. One I hadn't even realized I'd been living inside. I'll meet you at the house Saturday, Carol said. There's something we need to open. After hanging up, I went down to the basement for the first time in 2 years. Robert's scent still lingered. Old books, cedar, and that aftershave he used sparingly but with loyalty. His desk looked like he'd just stepped out for coffee. Half-finished crossword, a mug with a faded US Navy emblem, a small stack of notes written in his tight mathematical script. Behind the far wall, camouflaged in a panel painted to look like concrete, was the safe I'd never touched. I hadn't known it existed until the day he died, and even then I'd been too grief-paralyzed to face it. But now I had Marcus Thornfield trying to turn me into a marionette, and grief suddenly had to wait its turn. I turned the key. Yes, Robert left me the key in a sealed envelope marked simply, "If someone comes for you." Inside were rows of neatly organized folders, labeled in that tiny, tidy handwriting of his. Real estate, offshore holdings, trusts, contingency planning, emergency contacts. And at the very bottom, a cream envelope. On it again, that simple instruction, "Sylvia, read first." My hands shook a little as I opened it. My dearest Sylvia, if you're reading this, someone is trying to take what we built. I'm sorry I never told you about the accounts. I wanted you to feel safe, not burdened. The money is real. $33 million diversified and protected in ways even Marcus Thornfield's expensive hair couldn't untangle. You have full control. No one else can touch it. I made sure of that. There's a woman named Carol Peterson. You already know her. Trust her. And use the money, Sylvia. Use it to burn down anyone who tries to reduce you. I built this fortune so we could live modestly but die powerful. It's yours now. Protect yourself. And if you can, protect others too. All my love, Robert. I sat in his old leather chair for a long time, the weight of his words heavier than any gold bar. $33 million. I'd been clipping coupons while sitting on a throne. Let me tell you something else about aging. Everyone assumes your power lies in the past. But wisdom, real wisdom, is knowing your power can begin at any moment. Even if that moment involves a hidden safe and a letter written by a dead man who loved you fiercely. When Carol arrived the next morning, I was already armed with questions. You knew? I did, she admitted, but it wasn't my place to tell you until you opened that safe. We spent hours combing through documents, verifying accounts, confirming that the money wasn't just real. It was shielded by legal structures Marcus couldn't even pronounce, let alone penetrate. And Marcus, I asked. Debt-ridden, Carol said. Owes hundreds of thousands to private lenders and at least one Vegas casino. His parents have bailed him out twice. This is his last play. Emma doesn't know. Of course not. She's the patsy. He needed proximity to your assets. She provided it. And just like that, my daughter's marriage stopped being a celebration and started looking like a Trojan horse. I learned a new odd fact that day. Goldfish can recognize human faces. They're smarter than they look. I was done looking harmless. I was done letting predators circle me. Carol and I spent Saturday night drafting a plan, not just to counter Marcus's power grab, but to expose it, document it, and weaponize it. When I finally crawled into bed, Robert's letter resting on my nightstand, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. Marcus thought I was a widow who'd lost her direction, but in truth, I'd just found it. The funny thing about preparing for war at 72 is that it looks a lot like preparing for tea. You tidy the house, arrange the chairs just right, and make sure your guest has everything they need, except you're the only one who knows they're walking into an ambush. Marcus called Sunday morning, his voice all sunshine and shallow sincerity. "Sylvia," he said, "I've been thinking more about our dinner. I'm really glad we had that talk." "Me too," I cooed. "It gave me so much to consider. Honestly, I feel safer already." That word, safer, I knew it thrilled him. He probably thought I'd spent the night folding sweaters and doubting myself. "I was wondering," he said, "if we could continue our conversation. Somewhere quieter. Maybe your home? I could bring a few more documents, just examples to clarify everything." "My home," I said, pretending to hesitate. "Yes, that might be best. Let's say Wednesday at 7. "Perfect," he replied, barely hiding his eagerness. "It'll be completely private." Exactly what I wanted. I spent the next 3 days doing what any soft-spoken, falsely helpless widow would do, rigging my house like a courtroom. Carol and her tech team arrived Tuesday evening. "Everything's discreet," she said, placing small cameras in the corners of the living room, one inside the lamp base and another cleverly hidden in a ceramic bird figurine. The microphone was tucked under a doily on the coffee table because nothing says, "You can trust me," like lace and dust. I even set up a tray with cookies and tea because hospitality is important when you're catching a thief. Wednesday evening arrived as calm as a pond before a cannonball. I wore the same grey dress from the wedding, minimal makeup, and my mother's tiny cross necklace. In the mirror, I looked exactly like what Marcus expected, soft, sentimental, and slightly lost. He knocked at exactly 7. Punctual. Opportunists usually are. I opened the door and found him smiling, briefcase in hand. "Thank you for trusting me," he said. "Of course, dear," I replied. "Trust is everything, isn't it?" He stepped inside and surveyed the living room like he was already redecorating in his mind. "This won't take long," he promised. "Just a few clarifying examples. Then we can move forward at your pace." I gestured to the couch. "Please, take your time." He began pulling papers from his briefcase, spreading them across the coffee table with well-rehearsed grace. Charts, case studies, testimonials that probably came from the same font generator that did his resume. "These are just to show how other families have benefited from similar arrangements," he said. "So generous of you," I murmured, pouring tea. "You'll see," he continued. "Once this is in place, you won't have to worry about anything, money, medical issues, even things like travel or housing. It'll all be taken care of." Odd fact, in ancient Rome, they used crushed mouse brains in toothpaste. Think about that the next time someone offers to take care of you. I took a slow sip of tea. "Tell me something, Marcus. When did you start helping families with these arrangements?" "Oh, a while now," he said, avoiding my eyes. "My experience in finance really prepared me for this kind of support." "And what was your role in those situations?" He blinked. I facilitated, offered advice, guidance. "Did you ever sign for anyone else?" "Only when necessary," he said. "Sometimes elderly individuals struggle with forms. It's helpful to have someone authorized." Academic argument time. Consent is not valid when acquired through manipulation. In law and ethics, capacity must be informed, voluntary, and free from coercion. What Marcus proposed was a legal hostage situation dressed in good intentions. "Marcus," I said gently, "have you ever considered that some people might not need help?" He smiled. "Everyone needs help, Sylvia. Some just don't realize it. And what if someone realizes they're being coerced?" His eyes flicked toward the hallway. "Then that person is probably confused. You know, it happens more often than people admit. My lawyer says mental decline can be hard to detect at first." There it was, confusion, the golden ticket for declaring someone unfit. I leaned in slightly. "Would you say I seem confused?" "Not exactly," he said carefully, "but there are warning signs: isolation, over-attachment to routines, resistance to change. And you're here to protect me from myself?" "I'm here because I care." He said it like a closing argument, as if concern, repeated often enough, could drown out manipulation. "Well," I said, folding my hands, "let's say I agree. What would happen next?" He brightened. "We'd sign a few documents. I brought the notary. Everything would be official tonight." I smiled, so prepared. "Always." He handed me the pen. My hand trembled, just enough to match the image I'd built. I signed the first page, then the second, then paused before the third. "Marcus," I said softly, "what happens to my money after this?" His voice turned smooth. "Your finances will be professionally managed." "By whom?" He hesitated. "Me and Emma, of course." "And if I change my mind?" He smiled wider. "These arrangements are permanent. They're for your own protection, remember?" I laid the pen down. "Then it's important you know something before we proceed." His smile faltered. "What's that?" "I know about your debts." The blood drained from his face like it was on a fire escape. "Excuse me?" "The gambling, the private loans, the two businesses that weren't real. I know everything." He stood. "This is ridiculous." "I also know that this conversation," I gestured around the room, "has been recorded." A beat of silence. Then chaos bloomed in his eyes. "You can't do this!" "Oh, but I already have. Carol, would you kindly join us?" The side door opened and Carol entered, calm and radiant like the justice system in heels. Marcus's voice cracked. "You entrapped me." "No, dear," I said sweetly. "You walked into a room with cameras and confessed. That's called arrogance, not entrapment." Footsteps thundered outside. 2 uniformed officers entered. "Mr. Thornfield," one said, "you're under arrest for attempted elder fraud." As they cuffed him, he thrashed once, then looked at me, hatred flooding his expression. "This isn't over." I leaned in, inches from his face. "Yes, Marcus, it absolutely is." The news broke before sunrise. I was in the kitchen making coffee the way Robert used to, 1 scoop too strong and always with a slice of silence, when my neighbor, Doris, knocked on the back door with her phone clutched like a relic. "Sylvia," she gasped, waving the screen at me. "Is this your son-in-law?" I took the phone gently. There he was, in grainy footage, ducking into a police cruiser. The headline read, "Local financier arrested in elder fraud sting." I handed the phone back, poured Doris a cup of coffee and said, "Yes, that's Marcus. He's finally found a job title that fits." Doris blinked. "You always were quiet about him, because quiet is how you aim." By 10 a.m., the story had gone national. Carol called me from her office. "We've already had 3 inquiries from other victims," she said. "Women, mostly. Widows, all saying the same thing. Marcus used charm to get close, then tried to take control." "Do we have names?" I asked. "Working on it. But Sylvia, this could be bigger than Marcus. Funny how one man's arrogance can blow open a vault. Let me tell you a truth they don't put in retirement pamphlets. Most people believe aging is a slow fade, but it's not. It's a sharpening. You get clearer, meaner if you're smart, and smarter if you've survived loss. By noon, the FBI had called Carol. They wanted to talk. Turns out Marcus wasn't freelancing. He was part of a network, a series of polished predators who'd been targeting wealthy, isolated seniors for over a decade. They used marriage, friendship, family connections, anything to look harmless. They were organized, they were trained, they were professional, which meant I wasn't just a victim. I was a breach in their system. That afternoon, Carol and I met Agent Sarah Torres, a woman with a steel ponytail and the kind of eyes that had seen the worst and stayed open anyway. "We've been tracking a pattern," she said. "Elderly individuals with unguarded assets, sudden transfers of power, rapid changes in legal authority. But no one's ever fought back like you did." "Well," I said, "he sat me behind flowers like I was an antique. That was his first mistake." She smiled. "We'd like to collaborate with you." "On what?" "Creating a response program, funded by victims, powered by law, designed to hunt predators like Marcus." I thought about Robert, about his letter, about the line that read, "Use it to burn down anyone who tries to reduce you." I nodded. "I'll fund the first wave. Let's make sure I'm the last one they try." Odd fact. Some species of squid can edit their own RNA, essentially rewriting their genetic instructions on the fly. If they can do that without a lawyer, so can I. The program began quietly, anonymously. We called it Widow Watch because naming things accurately is the first step to justice. Marcus's arrest opened the door. But what came through was a flood. Over the next 2 weeks, 23 more victims came forward. A retired math teacher in Tampa, a widower in Nevada, a woman in New Jersey whose son-in-law had nearly sold her condo before she found out. And as each story surfaced, so did the names of Marcus's associates. Lawyers, notaries, real estate agents, bank employees, people who had helped shift power from the vulnerable to the predators. We started to see the shape of the network, and it looked like a family tree of crime. That's when the name Thornfield came up again, but not Marcus. William Thornfield, his uncle, the one who'd helped him get started. Carol read the file aloud. "William Thornfield, 58, 3 aliases, 5 businesses, all defunct. History of financial misconduct dating back to the late 90s. Agent Torres leaned forward. "He's the architect. Marcus was just the student." My skin went cold. "They call him the planner," Carol added. "He teaches young men how to identify elderly targets, even coaches them on emotional cues to exploit." I felt sick. "Get him," I said. Agent Torres nodded. "We will, but we'll need you. Use my money, use my house, use my name if you have to, just make it end." That night, Emma called. Her voice trembled. "Mom, what's happening? The news, Marcus, why didn't you tell me?" I closed my eyes because I didn't want to break your heart. "You should have broken it sooner." She came over an hour later, her face blotchy with grief and rage. I poured her tea and we sat in silence, 2 women with one ghost between them. "I believed him," she whispered. "I let him touch everything, my life, our future." "Predators make you feel chosen," I said. "That's their first trick. And then they strip you of everything and call it care." She stared at her cup. "What do I do now? You file for divorce?" "I still love him." "I know, but loving someone doesn't mean you let them eat you alive." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheek. "Was it all a lie?" she asked. "No," I said. "Just the part where he said he loved you more than your inheritance." Emma filed for divorce the following Tuesday. No press, no announcement, just a quiet line at the courthouse, a woman in flats, and a marriage certificate dissolving like paper in water. She didn't cry afterward, not even when we got back to my house and I made her favorite sandwich, peanut butter, banana, and guilt. "I feel like a fraud," she whispered. You were defrauded, I corrected gently. Big difference. It wasn't over for Emma, not by a long stretch, but the hardest part had passed. She had seen the truth. And if age teaches you anything, it's that clarity is more valuable than closure. Later that night, Carol called with an update. We found William Thornfield. He's operating out of Savannah under the name Kent Abernathy. Of course he is, I said. All villains have stupid pseudonyms. We're sending someone down to approach him, undercover. No, I said, slowly sitting up straighter in my chair. Send me. Carol laughed until she realized I wasn't joking. You can't go undercover. Why not? I'm a widow. I've got assets. I've got a friendly smile and a supposedly foggy mind. I'm exactly what he's looking for. Carol hesitated. It's dangerous. So is underestimating me. 2 days later, with the FBI's blessing and more backup than the Secret Service, I flew to Savannah using my middle name and maiden last name, Diana Lively. Sounds like someone who collects seashells and thinks the moon affects her arthritis. Perfect. The meeting took place at a quaint retirement investment brunch, code for show me your bank account while I show you my Rolex. I arrived in a soft blue dress, matching hat, and orthopedic heels that could kill a man if you aimed right. William was exactly what I expected. Polite, polished, and predatory. He approached me by the quiche tray. Diana, was it? Yes, I smiled sweetly. You must be Mr. Abernathy. Call me Kent, he said with a handshake that felt like satin hiding razors. You have a lovely energy. Widowed, are you? Just recently, I said. My husband was very prepared. That got his attention. Oh? He asked, tilting his head. He handled all the money, of course, I said, voice fluttering like a napkin in wind. I'm a bit lost. His smile widened, and just like that, I was in. Odd fact, the mimic octopus can impersonate other sea creatures to avoid predators or attract prey. I wasn't impersonating anyone. I was just being exactly who men like him thought I was. We chatted over muffins and malice. He told me about protective measures and legal guardianship, and how many widows these days were being scammed by dishonest nephews. The projection was Olympic level. By the time the second mimosa was poured, he was suggesting a private consultation. Bring your papers, he said. We'll make sure no one takes advantage of you. Oh, I do hope so, I replied, clutching his business card like it was a lifeline. That night, I called Carol. It's him, I said. Same language, same documents, same pressure wrapped in pleasantries. The FBI pulled the trigger 3 days later. William was arrested at his office in the middle of a meeting with another widow. The agents seized 20 years of documents, client lists, digital files, and personal letters. The scale of it was staggering. 43 victims, millions stolen. He was indicted on federal racketeering charges within the week. Carol met me at the courthouse after the arraignment. She looked winded, like she'd just run a marathon without leaving her desk. Do you know what you've done? She asked. Hopefully made him miss lunch. You didn't just catch a predator, Sylvia. You cut the head off an entire organization. She handed me a file. These are the names of his known protégés. Every single one was trained to hunt people like you. I flipped through the pages slowly. Smiling faces, clean-cut men in tailored suits, all of them Marcus in one form or another. How many of them are still active? I asked. Too many. I closed the file. Then we keep going. That's the thing about exposure. It's addictive. Once you've yanked back the curtain and seen who's pulling the strings, you can't stop. Not until every hand is accounted for. Odd fact, sloths can hold their breath longer than dolphins. That has nothing to do with fraud, but it reminds me that patience, real patience, is often mistaken for weakness. I wasn't being patient anymore. I was being strategic. And strategy, when fueled by rage, loss, and a $33 million trust fund, can be terrifying. That weekend, we held the first official meeting of the Federal Elder Protection Task Force, funded entirely by the trust Robert left behind. Carol called it the widow's war chest. Agent Torres called it the best private partnership the FBI has ever seen. I just called it overdue. We built a national hotline. We launched investigations in 6 more states. We created training programs for local law enforcement. And everywhere we went, one name was whispered like a bedtime warning for criminals. Sylvia Hartley. Me? The widow behind the flowers. The woman they thought wouldn't fight back. The Monday after William Thornfield's indictment, I stood in front of a room full of people who didn't know whether to applaud me or fear me. And honestly, I preferred it that way. It was the first national conference for elder fraud prevention, and they'd asked me to open the summit. Me, a woman who used to measure her days in spoonfuls of sugar and quiet sighs. Now I was measuring them in indictments. I wore navy, always navy now. It's a color that says, I mourned and now I rule. The room was filled with prosecutors, agents, analysts, and journalists. They expected me to give a polite speech. Instead, I gave them a warning. Predators don't hide in shadows, I said. They walk into your home with a casserole and a compliment. They call you dear. They ask about your will. Silence. These men, and yes, they are mostly men, don't just steal money. They steal autonomy, confidence, dignity, and they do it while saying they care. A pause. From now on, let's be clear. If you come for our independence, we will come for your empire. And you won't see us coming because we'll be wearing pearls. The room erupted. Standing ovation. Let me tell you something people don't realize until they're older. Rage, when refined, becomes strategy. I wasn't angry anymore. I was motivated. After the summit, Agent Torres pulled me aside. We've found something, she said, flipping open a folder. It was a new name, a young man, early 30s, former protege of William. Had recently married into the fortune of an 84-year-old widow in Connecticut. Her name's Barbara Lynn, Torres said. No kids. Her husband died last year, and she signed over everything 3 weeks ago. Does she know? She thinks she's in love. That old burn in my chest reignited. We had to move fast. The very next day, I flew to Connecticut with Carol and 2 agents. Barbara was staying in her late husband's lakeside home, porcelain ducks on the porch, garden full of tulips, a gentle breeze that smelled like lavender and deception. She answered the door in a floral robe, looking as lovely and delicate as fine china. Barbara, I said, I'm Sylvia Hartley. I believe you're in danger. She laughed softly. Oh dear, you must be mistaken. My husband Mark, he's wonderful. We sat on her couch. Her hands trembled as she poured tea. There were framed photos of Mark beside her, the smiling predator. I showed her the file, bank transfers, legal changes, a sudden switch of power of attorney. She didn't cry. She didn't faint. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Then let's take him down." Barbara turned out to be tougher than I was at 50. Within 2 days, she'd recorded conversations, recovered passwords, and handed over a treasure chest of emails. Mark was arrested on a Sunday, barefoot and furious. The neighbors applauded from their porches like it was a 4th of July parade. Odd fact, wombat poop is cube-shaped. It helps them mark territory so it won't roll away. I found that comforting. Even nature makes oddly aggressive statements. Barbara's case made the national news, and suddenly our hotline lit up like Times Square. Dozens of victims. Some didn't even know they were victims until we showed them what to look for, and every time we added a new name to the list of arrested con artists, I felt Robert in the room. Carol and I met every Thursday. It had become our ritual: wine, files, progress. "This trust of Robert's," she said one night, "it's doing more than protecting you. It's funding a revolution." "He built it for this," I said. "He built it for you." That part still caught in my throat. Emma joined us that night. She brought lemon bars and an apology she didn't need to make. "I should have known," she said. "I was so blind." "You were in love," I told her. "That's not blindness, that's bravery. You trusted, he betrayed." Emma had been attending therapy. She was stronger now, wiser. She no longer flinched when Marcus's name came up in conversation. "Do you think he regrets it?" she asked once. "Absolutely," I said, "but not because he hurt you, because he failed." The Thornfield name, once reserved for polished Christmas cards and tailored suits, was now synonymous with federal indictment. And that's the thing about legacy. You don't choose the one you leave behind. You only choose the one you build. And Marcus? He built a warning. "Don't Thornfield it," people started saying in quiet circles of fraudsters. "You'll get Hartlead." Yes, my name was now a verb. I slept well that night, knowing somewhere Marcus was not. Thursday morning arrived with a phone call that didn't ask for permission. It demanded it. Agent Torres again. "Sylvia," she said, "Marcus wants to make a deal." I blinked once, twice. He wants to cooperate. He's naming names. He's terrified. Apparently prison isn't agreeing with him. "Poor lamb," I said, putting my toast down. He didn't think there'd be consequences when he plotted to euthanize my rights with a notarized pen. Torres chuckled. "He's already named half a dozen associates. If he keeps going, we might be able to charge leaders in 27 states. Give him a pen and a glass of warm milk. Tell him he's doing great." We hung up, but I didn't finish my toast. I just sat there staring out at the bird feeder Robert had built, wondering how something so small could start a war so large, because that's what it had become, a war. Between people who think the elderly are disposable and people like me who know better. Carol arrived late morning, trench coat flapping in the wind like something out of a noir film. "We got approval," she said, "to expand the task force. You're officially the largest private donor to elder fraud prosecution in the country." I thought I already was. "Yes, but now it's on paper and there's a plaque." "A plaque," I said. "How very dignified." She grinned and pulled out a stack of letters. "You need to see these." There were dozens, handwritten, typed, even one with glitter, sent from people who'd gotten their lives back. A retired nurse in Boise, a Korean war vet in Dallas, a woman in Miami who'd nearly lost her condo to her helpful nephew. They all said the same thing. "Thank you for reminding us we're not powerless. Let me tell you a secret. Old age isn't weakness. It's a weapon. You've seen it all. Lost people, gained people, paid bills in the dark, held funerals with shaky hands. You know what matters. And more importantly, you know what doesn't. And in that clarity lives a terrifying kind of freedom. Odd fact, queen ants can live for decades. Workers die fast, but queens, they endure. I'm not saying I'm royalty, but I will outlast you if you make the mistake of underestimating me." We took the letters to Agent Torres. She scanned them slowly, her brow furrowed with a kind of reverence. "We want to build a national advocacy center," she said. "Training, legal support, asset recovery, early detection systems. But we need a figurehead." Carol raised her eyebrows. "You mean a mascot?" "A founder," Torres clarified. I sat quietly, holding a letter from a woman who wrote that she hadn't spoken above a whisper in 5 years, until she heard what I'd done. "Make it loud," I said, "make it unignorable." And so we did. The Hartley Foundation for Elder Defense was born that spring, fully funded, fully staffed, fully feared. Its tagline? "You target one of us, you answer to all of us." Within 3 months, we had offices in 15 states. Within 6, we'd helped prosecute 147 fraud-related cases. And by the end of the year, over $40 million had been recovered for victims. But the most powerful weapon wasn't the lawsuits or the warrants. It was the fear. Word spread fast in underground circles. If your target mentions the name Sylvia Hartley, walk away, fast. They called me the ghost, because by the time they realized who they were dealing with, it was already too late. Emma came over that summer for dinner. Grilled salmon, rosemary potatoes, and a quiet glass of white wine. "You know," she said between bites, "I saw someone on TikTok call you Momzilla." I nearly choked. "They said you're like a sweet grandma with a chainsaw." "That's horrifying," I laughed, "and maybe a little flattering." She pulled out her phone. "Look at this." It was a video of an elderly woman in Arizona reading one of my speeches aloud into the camera. "You can choose to be helpless," she quoted, "or you can choose to be terrifying to the people who want to hurt you." "She has 2 million views," Emma said. "Your words are becoming weapons." I nodded. Good, that's what they were meant to be. You see, I'd lived long enough to know that silence is often the last luxury of the naive. When someone tries to dismantle your life under the guise of concern, you don't whisper, you roar. And people had started roaring. In Florida, a group of widows launched their own watchdog organization, the Lavender League. In Oregon, a retirement home installed predator alert training modules for staff. In Vermont, a man in his 80s testified in court for the first time in his life, quoting me directly. "We are not soft," he said. "We are not frail, we are furious." That quote ended up on the front page of the Washington Post. Carol framed it for me. It hangs in my study now, right beside Robert's Navy flag. So when people ask me what I do with my days now, this is it. I protect. I prosecute. I persist. And I promise you this, if you come for our rights, our money, or our peace, you'll have to go through me. And I bite. The thing about becoming a legend is, no one asks if you want to be one. One day you're clipping basil on your porch. The next, your voicemail starts with, "Good morning, this is the Attorney General's office." It happened on a Tuesday. I was elbow deep in a lemon pound cake recipe when Carol called with a breathless urgency that made me turn off the mixer. "The Senate wants you to testify," she said. "About Marcus?" "About everything, the network, the arrests, the program. They want to write legislation based on what we've built." I leaned against the counter, flour still in my hands. "Let me guess, they want to call it the Elder Protection Act. They want to call it the Hartley Act." For a moment, I just stood there, the smell of lemon, the sound of birds outside, the entire weight of the last 2 years pressing against my chest like a second set of lungs. And then I laughed. Let's give them a story they'll remember. The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. Senate Committee on Aging, live broadcast, full press. Emma came with me. She wore black slacks and her brave face. "Mom," she whispered backstage, "are you nervous?" "I'm 74, I said. "I've buried a husband, birthed a daughter, and survived wedding seating politics. Senators don't scare me." The hearing room was freezing, as all government buildings seemed to be, and yet the air was electric. As if the ghosts of every widow who'd ever been ignored were watching from the marble corners. They called my name. I walked to the table, placed my statement on the microphone, and looked every elected official dead in the eye. Then I spoke. "Thank you, senators. 2 years ago, I was a grieving widow who just wanted to be left alone. But predators don't leave you alone. They come smiling with folders full of legal poison, and they call it protection." Murmurs. "I'm here today because someone tried to steal my autonomy, my assets, my name, and in doing so, they accidentally gave me a purpose." I paused. "Let it settle. The Hartley Act, if passed, will make elder fraud a federal crime with mandatory sentencing. It will create a national watchdog agency and allow for proactive monitoring of high-risk financial behavior around vulnerable seniors. Senator Langford leaned in. Mrs. Hartley, some people argue that mandatory sentencing is too harsh. I smiled politely. Senator, stealing a person's independence is a life sentence for the victim. It seems only fair we return the favor. Academic argument? Sure. Here it is. Legal deterrents work when the risk of punishment outweighs the reward. We've spent decades babying white-collar criminals with fines and wrist slaps. But when you attack someone's autonomy, when you orchestrate their helplessness, you're not a businessman. You're a thief in a tailored suit. Odd fact, the mimic poison frog raises its young in small pools of water inside bromeliads. Each tadpole is fed unfertilized eggs by the mother. Pure sacrifice. Protection isn't always soft. Sometimes it requires calculated ferocity. The hearing lasted 3 hours. When it ended, the room stood and applauded. Emma squeezed my hand. Mom, you're terrifying, in a good way. That's the only way I do terrifying. That night, I found a note slipped under my hotel door. Dear Mrs. Hartley, my mother was nearly conned by someone like Marcus. She was ashamed and almost didn't tell anyone. Then she saw your interview. She said, if she can roar, so can I. Thank you for giving her back her voice. A grateful son, I didn't cry, but I sat down on the edge of my hotel bed, stared out the window at the dark Washington skyline, and whispered, You were right, Robert. The next morning brought news from Agent Torres. Marcus is testifying. He's naming everyone, even the ones in Europe. Why? Because he's scared, and because he knows the longer he talks, the longer he stays out of general population. What's the total network size? Over 200 confirmed members, some linked to major financial institutions. I didn't blink. We get them all. You want to go global? I want to make sure that no widow, no grandfather, no pensioner wakes up wondering if they've been signed away in their sleep. By Friday, we were expanding our reach. New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, even an office in London. The Hartley Protocol, as it was now known, became standard training in law schools and retirement home staff certifications. And the predators? They started folding. 3 surrendered without arrest. 1 tried to flee to Panama, got caught at the airport with forged passports and a suitcase full of burner phones. Another walked into an FBI field office and said, I don't want to end up like Marcus. That one made me laugh for a week. Because here's the thing no one tells you about power in old age. It doesn't look like what they expect. It doesn't come from shouting. It doesn't come from threats. It comes from survival. And when you survive long enough, you don't beg for mercy. You define justice. The letter came in an envelope the color of ash. Thick paper, expensive ink, and handwriting I recognized instantly. Marcus. I hadn't seen his name in ink since the day he handed me that ridiculous manila folder and asked for the keys to my life. I opened it with the same care I'd used to lift a dead snake off my porch. Just enough caution to respect the venom. Sylvia, this isn't a confession. It's a reckoning. You've destroyed everything I built, my marriage, my name, my future. But what you don't seem to understand is I'm not the only one out there. I was just the unlucky one who picked the wrong widow. You think your law will stop this? You think you've scared them? They're already adapting. You've made them smarter, meaner. This isn't over, M. I folded the letter calmly, slipped it back into the envelope, and placed it on the fireplace mantel beneath Robert's photo. You hear that, darling? I said. He still thinks this is about him. Carol stopped by later that afternoon. I showed her the letter. Typical narcissist. she said, barely glancing at it. Everything's a threat. Nothing's a lesson. Let's make it both. That evening, I sat down at my writing desk, opened a fresh notepad, and began crafting what I called the Hartley Manifesto. It was 10 pages long. The first page read, "To whom it should concern, here's how we see you coming before you knock." It outlined behaviors to watch for, patterns, warning signs, what legitimate caregivers say, and what predators pretend to say. I wrote it in simple English, no legal jargon, just a survival guide written by someone who'd walked through the fire. By morning, we'd translated it into 16 languages and mailed it to every major senior living community in the country. Odd fact, elephants mourn their dead, they return to bones. Touch them with their trunks, they remember. And that memory makes them dangerous to anyone who causes harm. Memory is not just about grief, it's about preservation, Torres called later with an update. Marcus is trying to negotiate a reduced sentence for emotional trauma, she said, her voice dry as dust. He says the sting operation exploited his trust. Did you tell him the hibiscus centerpiece at my daughter's wedding was the first betrayal? She laughed. He's being denied. The parole board wasn't impressed. Good, because I'm about to ensure his name means failure in 3 continents. And I meant it. By summer, we launched the International Widows Network, a collective of elder advocates, legal experts, and fraud survivors from 6 countries. The motto? We don't age quietly. Every week brought new letters. A 92-year-old woman in France who stopped her grandson from managing her estate. A widower in Malaysia who recognized the phrases from my guide and called the police. A couple in Canada who started teaching workshops called Bite Back Before You Sign. And I began to notice something unexpected. The fear that had once whispered in so many voices, it was gone. In its place, humor, anger, defiance, the joyful kind of fury that comes from remembering you're not too old to fight. Emma and I hosted a dinner that fall. We invited survivors from 10 states. The living room was filled with gray hair, strong voices, and laughter sharp enough to slice steak. One woman toasted to Sylvia Hartley, who taught us that lipstick and legal briefs are not mutually exclusive. We all clinked glasses. Even Emma, who had started writing articles about emotional manipulation in marriages. You know, she said after dessert, I don't even recognize the woman I used to be. You weren't weak, I told her. You were trusting. That's not a flaw. I see that now, but only because you let me. That's the thing about fighting predators. You don't just save yourself, you leave doors open behind you. Carol approached me a week later with a proposition. The Department of Justice wants to give you a formal role. Training officers, consulting on cases, maybe even testifying in international courts. They want to put me in a suit? They want to give you a chair at the table. I smiled. I built my own table, but I'll lend them a leg. Odd fact. Some frogs can survive being frozen solid. Their hearts stopped, their bodies stiff. When they thaw, they pick up where they left off. Survival doesn't always mean moving forward. Sometimes it means pausing until you're ready to strike. Marcus thought freezing me behind flowers would paralyze me. What he didn't realize was I was just conserving energy. Torres told me something that night I'll never forget. There's a file we keep for known fraud deterrents. People, strategies, programs. Your name is the only one that's both a strategy and a deterrent. What's the file called? The Hartley Effect. I hung up the phone, poured myself a glass of wine, and watched the sun set over my backyard. The same yard where I once buried tulip bulbs in silence, trying to outlive grief. Now I was planting landmines for every predator who thought time made people weak. Marcus had wanted power. He gave me purpose. And purpose? Purpose ages like a diamond. The autumn Marcus was denied parole. The leaves outside my kitchen window turned a shade of crimson I'd never seen before. Even nature, it seemed, was done being subtle. I sipped my coffee and reread the parole board's statement. Mr. Thornfield displays no credible remorse and continues to present a risk of recidivism. Early release denied. Recidivism, a lovely word for he'll do it again, which in Marcus's case was as certain as sunrise. Emma showed up a few minutes later, a croissant in one hand and a copy of the Wall Street Journal in the other. "Page 6, she said, sliding the paper across the table. There it was, Hartley Act expansion unanimously passed by Senate. I didn't smile, I just exhaled, slow and quiet. Emma watched me. "Do you realize what you've done?" "Yes," I said. "I've made it professionally inconvenient to steal from old women." And I had... The Hartley Act wasn't just policy anymore. It was a framework, a toolkit, a loaded weapon handed to every prosecutor who had ever watched a vulnerable adult be steamrolled by a smiling relative with a signature pen. That month, we launched our flagship training program, Predator Patterns 101. Lesson 1. They never start with paperwork, they start with praise. Lesson 2. If they're suddenly interested in your medication schedule, your estate is next. Lesson 3. If someone tells you not to tell your lawyer immediately. We turned it into a YouTube series. It went viral. Not with the usual crowd, mind you, but with boomers, widows, and folks who kept a notepad by the landline. The comment section became a support group with sass. One woman wrote, "I used to think signing things made people happy. Now I ask for badge numbers and business cards first. Thanks, Sylvia." Another, "My grandson asked about my will. I told him I left everything to the HOA. Haven't heard from him since." Torres called me with quarterly numbers. Arrests are up 48%, false POA filings are down 30%, and hotline calls have tripled. And Marcus? Still refusing therapy, still thinks he's the smartest man in the room. Then he hasn't learned a thing. Odd fact, male anglerfish fuse to females during mating, literally becoming parasitic. Marcus would have made an excellent anglerfish, clinging, draining, then disappearing when no longer useful. I decided to write him another letter, not out of forgiveness, out of closure. "Marcus, you didn't break me. You built me. You thought I was a bank account in a cardigan. You didn't see the war widow, the business partner, the woman who read Robert's investment books while folding laundry. You thought you were the predator. Turns out you were the warm-up." Sylvia. I didn't mail it. I sent it to Torres. She read it aloud at a task force meeting. They framed it in the break room. Carol arrived later that week with a news bulletin. "They're naming the National Recovery Database after you." The what? The system that tracks stolen assets and transfers for elder victims. It'll be called the Hartley Ledger. I stared at her. I sound like a superhero accountant. You are. The truth? I didn't need my name on anything, but if it made some young fraudster think twice before targeting a sweet-faced woman with a steady pension and a sharper mind, then it was worth every syllable. We held a small gathering to mark the milestone. Me, Carol, Emma, Torres, a handful of agents, and 3 elderly men who used to be victims and now trained law enforcement. One of them, Frank, a retired woodworker with 4 arms like oak trunks, raised his glass and said, "I spent 50 years building furniture. Lost everything to a man who said I looked tired. Got it all back because of a woman who wore pearls to war." I blushed, but inside I glowed. Later that night, Emma sat beside me on the porch. We watched a raccoon terrorize the bird feeder, unbothered by our presence. "You ever think it'll be over?" she asked. "No," I said, "and that's okay." "You're not tired?" "I'm alive." That's the difference. Tired is what you feel when you're waiting for rest. Alive is what you feel when you know rest is earned. And I wasn't ready to rest. Carol called again a few days later. This time, her voice was quiet. There's chatter online. Marcus's old associates, they're regrouping. Names? New aliases, new faces, same tricks. But there's one thing they don't have. What's that? You. Winter settled in with a calm defiance. No blizzards, no frostbite. Just a soft, steady silence. Like the world itself was catching its breath before the next battle. I'd spent the last few weeks finishing what I thought was impossible, my book. Behind the Flowers, How I Turned a Wedding into a War. Carol said the title was too dramatic. I said it wasn't dramatic enough. The book wasn't about Marcus, not really. It was about power. How it's taken, how it's given away, and how you reclaim it when everyone thinks you're too old to notice it's missing. Emma wrote the foreword. She called it A Daughter's Second Chance. She said I saved her. But the truth is, she saved herself. I just stood nearby holding the flashlight. The book went to print on a Thursday. By Friday, we'd pre-sold over 80,000 copies. The emails poured in again. So did invitations, universities, law schools, elder care centers. But the only speaking engagement I accepted was in a local high school auditorium. 17-year-olds who thought fraud was something that happened in movies or to old people. I walked on stage in a navy jacket, slacks, and my favorite scarf Robert had once spilled Merlot on. I told them everything, not just the story, but the stakes, how power can be stolen slowly, how manipulation wears a smile, how silence is what predators pray for. At the end, a girl, maybe 16, stood up and said, "How do we help?" And I told her, you listen to your parents, your grandparents. You ask them if they've updated their passwords, if they have power of attorney documents. You ask if anyone's been overly helpful lately, and then you believe them. The crowd was silent, then they stood. Even teenagers know bravery when they see it. That night, Emma and I sat on the porch again, this time under blankets with hot cider and a sense of something like peace. "Do you think Marcus reads about you?" she asked. "If he does, I hope it burns," I said softly. "You're different now. I'm just finally whole." Emma reached into her bag and handed me a small wooden box. Inside was a silver pendant, a tiny engraved tulip. "From the task force?" she smiled. "They said you grew an army from grief." I held it to my chest. "Robert always said tulips were stubborn," I whispered, like someone else I know. We laughed and cried just a little, but they were good tears, the kind you shed when you know a story has finally landed where it was always meant to. And as the wind moved through the trees and the house creaked in its familiar rhythm, I realized something. Marcus wasn't the end, he was the beginning, because there will always be another predator. Another document, another betrayal hidden in politeness. But now there's also something else. A network, a playbook, a legacy. Me. I'm not just a widow behind flowers anymore. I'm the storm that follows. And if you ever forget that, look around. You'll see my name on acts, on ledgers, on letters framed in break rooms. But most of all, you'll see it in the eyes of every woman, every man, every survivor who now knows. We don't go down quietly. We grow louder with age, and we bite back.